Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the Government's ongoing work to secure a Brexit deal that honours our commitments to the people of Northern Ireland, commands the support of Parliament and can be negotiated with the EU. On the 29th of January, this House gave me a clear mandate and sent an unequivocal message to the European Union. Last week, I took that message to Brussels. I met President Juncker, President Tusk and the President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, and I told them clearly what Parliament wanted in order to unite behind a withdrawal agreement, namely legally binding changes to the backstop. And I explained to them the three ways in which this can be achieved. First, the backstop could be replaced with alternative arrangements to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. Yesterday, my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, met with Michel Barnier to discuss the ideas put forward by the Alternative Arrangements Working Group, comprised of a number of my honourable and Right Honourable friends. I'm grateful to that group for their work, and we are continuing to explore their ideas. Secondly, there could be a legally binding time limit to the existing backstop. Or third, there could be a legally binding unilateral exit clause to that backstop. Given both sides agree we do not ever want to use the backstop, and that if we did it would be temporary, we believe it is reasonable to ask for legally binding changes to this effect. Mr. Speaker, as expected, President Juncker maintained the EU's position that they will not reopen the withdrawal agreement. And I set out the UK's position, strengthened by the mandate that this House gave me, that this House needs to see legally binding changes to the backstop, and that can be achieved by changes to the withdrawal agreement. We both agreed that our team should hold further talks to find a way forward, and he and I will meet again before the end of February to take stock of those discussions. So our work continues. The Secretary of State and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster are today in Strasbourg, and last week the Attorney-General was in Dublin to meet his Irish counterpart. And following my own visits to Brussels, Northern Ireland and Ireland last week, I welcomed the Prime Minister of Malta to Downing Street yesterday, and I will be speaking to other EU27 leaders today and throughout the week. The Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, shares the concerns of this House on the backstop. I welcome his willingness to sit down and talk to me, and I look forward to continuing our discussions. Indeed, government ministers will be meeting with members of his team tomorrow. I think there are a number of areas where the whole House should be able to come together. In particular, I believe we have a shared determination across this House not to allow the UK leaving the EU to mean any lowering of standards in relation to workers' rights, environmental protections or health and safety. I have met trade unions and with members from across the House, and my Right Honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is leading work to ensure that we fully address all concerns about these vital issues. We've already made legally binding commitments to no regression in these areas if we were to enter the backstop, and we are prepared to consider legislating to give these commitments force in UK law. And in the interests of building support across the House, we're also prepared to commit to asking Parliament whether it wishes to follow suit whenever the EU changes its standards in these areas. And of course, we don't need to automatically follow EU standards in order to lead the way, as we have done in the past under both Conservative and Labour governments. The UK has a proud tradition of leading the way in workers' rights. The UK has a proud tradition of leading the way in workers' rights, whilst maintaining a flexible labour market that has helped deliver an employment rate almost 6 percentage points above the EU average. Successive governments of all parties have put in place standards that exceed the minimum set by the EU. A Labour government gave British workers annual leave and paid maternity leave entitlements well above that required by the European Union. A Conservative-led government went further than the EU by giving all employees the right to request flexible working. And I was proud to be the Minister for Women and Equalities to introduce shared parental leave so that both parents are able to take on caring responsibilities for their child, something no EU regulation provides for. When it comes to workers' rights, this Parliament has set a higher standard before, and I believe will do so in the future. Indeed, we already have plans to repeal the so-called Swedish derogation, which allows employers to pay their agency workers less, and we're committed to enforcing holiday pay for the most vulnerable workers, not just protecting workers' rights, but extending them. As I set out in my statement 2 weeks ago, the House also agrees that Parliament must have a much stronger and clearer role in the next phase of the negotiations. Because the political declaration cannot be legally binding and in some areas provides for a spectrum of outcomes, some members are understandably concerned that they cannot be sure precisely what future relationship it would lead to. By following through on our commitments and giving Parliament that bigger say in the mandate for the next phase, we are determined to address those concerns. The Secretary of State has written to all members of the Exiting the EU Committee, seeking their view on engaging Parliament in this next phase of negotiations. And we're also reaching out beyond this House to engage more deeply with businesses, civil society and trade unions. Everyone in this House knows that the vote for Brexit was not just about changing our relationship with the EU, but changing how things work at home, especially for those in communities who feel they have been left behind. Addressing this and widening opportunities is the mission of this government that I set out on my first day as Prime Minister. And I will continue to work with members across the House to do everything we can to help build a country that works for everyone. But, Mr. Speaker, one area where the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, and I do not agree is on his suggestion that the UK should remain a member of the EU Customs Union. I would gently point out that the House of Commons has already voted against this. And in any case,
a lot of noise and heckling, but the record shows that everyone gets a chance to question the Prime Minister. I think it is right that she should have a proper and respectful hearing, and the same courtesy must be extended to the Leader of the Opposition in due course. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, as I say, I would gently point out that the House of Commons has already voted against this. And in any case, membership of the Customs Union would be a less desirable outcome than that which is provided for in the political declaration. That would deliver no tariffs, fees, charges or quantitative restrictions across all sectors and no checks on rules of origin. But crucially, it would also provide for the development of an independent trade policy for the UK that would allow us to strike our own trade deals around the world, something the Labour Party once supported. On Thursday, as I promised in the House last month, we will bring forward an amendable motion. This will seek to reaffirm the support of the House for the amended motion from the 29th of January, namely to support the government in seeking changes to the backstop and to recognise that negotiations are ongoing. Having secured an agreement with the European Union for further talks, we now need some time to complete that process. When we achieve the progress we need, we will bring forward another meaningful vote. But if the government has not secured a majority in this House in favour of a withdrawal agreement and a political declaration, then the government will on Tuesday the 26th of February make a statement and table an amendable motion relating to the statement, and a minister will move that motion on Wednesday the 27th of February, thereby enabling the House to vote on it and on any amendments to it on that day. Mr. Speaker, as well as making clear what is needed to change in the withdrawal agreement, the House has also reconfirmed its view that it does not want to leave the EU without a deal. The government agrees, but opposing the deal is not enough to stop it. Opposing no deal is not enough to stop it. We must agree a deal that this House can support, and that is what I am working to achieve. I've spoken before about the damage that would be done to public faith in our democracy if this House were to ignore the result of the 2016 referendum. In Northern Ireland last week, I heard again the importance of securing a withdrawal agreement that works for all the people of this United Kingdom. In Belfast, I met not just with politicians, but with leaders of civil society and businesses from across the community. Following this House's rejection of the withdrawal agreement, many people in Northern Ireland are worried about what the current uncertainty will mean for them. In this House, we often focus on the practical challenges posed by the border in Northern Ireland. But for many people in Northern Ireland, What looms larger is the fear that the seamless border between Ireland and Northern Ireland that helped make the progress which has followed the Belfast Agreement possible might be disrupted. We must not let that happen, and we shall not let that happen. The talks are at a crucial stage, and we now all need to hold our nerve to get the changes this House requires and deliver Brexit on time. By getting the changes we need to the backstop, by protecting and enhancing workers' rights and environmental protections, and by enhancing the role of Parliament in the next phase of negotiations, I believe we can reach a deal that this House can support. We can deliver for the people and the communities that voted for change 2.5 years ago and whose voices for too long have not been heard. We can honour the result of the referendum, and we can set this country on course for the bright future that every part of this United Kingdom deserves. That is this government's mission. We shall not stint in our efforts to fulfil it, and I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I usually thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of her statement, but it was handed to me just as I was leaving my office to come down here, so I can only assume she entrusted it to the Transport Secretary to deliver it to me. Mr. Speaker, our country is facing the biggest crisis in a generation, and yet the Prime Minister continues to recklessly run down the clock. We were promised there would be a deal last October. It didn't happen. We were promised a meaningful vote on a deal in December. It didn't happen. We were told to prepare for a further meaningful vote this week after the Prime Minister again promised to secure significant and legally binding changes to the backstop, and that hasn't happened. Now the Prime Minister comes before the House with more excuses and more delays. In her statement, the Prime Minister has failed to answer even the most basic questions. What progress has she made on identifying and working up the alternative arrangements? Have they been presented to the European Union? If not, when will they be presented? And will she set them out before this House and ask for its approval of them? In truth, Mr. Speaker, it appears the Prime Minister has just one real tactic: to run down the clock, hoping members of this House are blackmailed into supporting a deeply flawed deal. This, Mr. Speaker, is an irresponsible act. She's playing for time and playing with people's jobs, our economic security and the future of our industries. Yesterday, growth figures show the lowest growth since 2012, our manufacturing sector mired into recession. The decision by Nissan last week to pull its investment from the Sunderland plant may only be the thin end of a very long wedge. Uncertainty and failing confidence in this government to deliver are putting jobs at risk. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Business Secretary will be hearing the same warnings as I am, that several major large manufacturers, household names employing tens of thousands of people, are poised to follow in Nissan's footsteps. Earlier today, we heard from the Leader of the House that the next meaningful vote may not happen until after the EU summit on the 21st of March, just days before Brexit is due to happen. If, Mr. Speaker, this is not the case, can the Prime Minister tell the House today when the meaningful vote will be? We also learned from the Leader of the House that any changes to the backstop won't be written into the legally binding withdrawal agreement. Can the Prime Minister confirm that? Is the Prime Minister really prepared to risk people's livelihoods, jobs and investment in a desperate attempt to push a deeply flawed deal through Parliament? The Prime Minister has just told members of this House to hold their nerve. Tell that to Nissan workers in Sunderland and the thousands more worried about their job security and the future of their communities. Mr. Speaker, no minister serious about protecting jobs in this country would allow a Prime Minister to deliberately run down the clock and play chicken with people's livelihoods. To stand by and do nothing would be a complete dereliction of duty. As I received, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's letter yesterday in response to Labour's Brexit plan, it became clearer to me the Prime Minister is merely engaged in the pretence of working across Parliament to find solutions. She has not indicated she will move one iota away from her rejected deal or any of her red lines. On the backstop, the Prime Minister has pointed out Labour also has concerns. But let's make no mistake about it, that has never been a major issue with the Prime Minister's deal. Indeed, in order to stop the UK falling into the backstop, we need a permanent customs union, and a strong single market deal. That is the key, Mr. Speaker, to maintaining an open border on the island of Ireland. That is key to protecting jobs, industry and living standards in this country. That is why it's backed by businesses who employ and trade unions who represent millions of workers in this country. And to correct the Prime Minister's claim in her statement, we want to negotiate a new UK-EU customs union, as I set out in my letter. The Prime Minister says there is no need to negotiate a customs union, as her deal provides for the benefit of being in one. I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, that is simply not the case. The deal the Prime Minister negotiated means there will be barriers to trade in goods. And there will not be frictionless trade, putting manufacturers across the country at a huge disadvantage. This is made quite clear in the political declaration, especially when it says, and I quote, "The parties will form separate markets and distinct legal orders," and concedes that, and I quote, "can lead to a spectrum of different outcomes for administrative processes as well as checks and controls." Nothing is secured. The Prime Minister is also trying to win support for her deal by promising to protect workers' rights after Brexit. Well, Mr. Speaker, just look at the record of the party opposite. Yes. They attacked trade union rights through the Trade Union Act. They kept this House up all night opposing the minimum wage in 1997. They're the party that introduced employment tribunal fees and introduced the public sector pay cap. For many of them, Mr. Speaker, ripping up rights is what Brexit is all about. Take the Secretary of State for International Trade. He once wrote, "It's too difficult to hire and fire, too expensive to take on new employees," and went on to say, "It is intellectually unsustainable to believe that workplace rights should remain untouchable." That was the Secretary of State for Trade. No wonder trade union leaders like Tim Roach of the GMB, Francis O'Grady, the Secretary of the TUC, have rejected the Prime Minister's inadequate pledges. And it's vital too, Mr. Speaker, that we keep pace with the best consumer safeguards and environmental protections, as if the warnings of the destruction of our biodiverse natural life are not serious enough. We have to be very serious about all environmental protections and indeed make them much stronger. Mr. Speaker, there is a sensible way forward, but the Prime Minister is refusing to listen. Labour's alternative has been widely welcomed as a way of breaking the impasse. From business leaders, European leaders, and even from some Conservative MPs. But the Prime Minister refuses to listen. Mr. Speaker, I urge all members across this House to think about the damage the Prime Minister's strategy is doing. The threat to industry and skilled jobs and communities all across this country. Now is not the time to stand idly by. Now is the time to stand up and do the right thing, to rule out no deal and back Labour's alternative plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, the right honourable gentleman mentioned the announcement that's been made by Nissan. I think for this House it's important to recognise that Nissan have confirmed that none of the current 7,000 jobs at the plant will be lost. They remain committed to the UK, and indeed, they will be making more capital will be invested in Sunderland than was originally planned in 2016. The right honourable gentleman asked me about progress on alternative arrangements and asked whether these were going to be put before the European Commission. Can I remind him what I said in my statement, which was, yesterday my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, met with Michel Barnier to discuss the ideas put forward by the Alternative Arrangements Working Group, comprised of a number of my honourable and right honourable friends. I think that answers his question. He talked about Labour's proposal. I referenced the issue of the customs union in my statement. But of course he also talks about being a member of the single market. Being a member of the single market means accepting free movement. One of the things that people voted for when they voted to leave the European Union was to bring an end to free movement, and that is what this government will deliver. He asked about dates for the process for votes that are going to take place in this House. I set those out in my statement as well. He referenced businesses quite a lot. Of course, businesses backed the deal, and he talks. They did. He talked about uncertainty. Of course, the best way to end uncertainty is to vote for a deal. And he talked about running down the clock. No, I wanted to have this sorted before Christmas. I bought a deal back from the rest of Christmas.
Order! Mr. Matheson, I have nurtured for a long time an ambition to see you become a statesman. I think you are threatening that prospect by these noisy gesticulations. Calm, Buddha-like. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The deal was negotiated before Christmas, so I wasn't in. It's not me who's trying to run down the clock. And it's no good Labour members who voted against the deal pointing their fingers across the House. Every time somebody votes against a deal, the risk of no deal increases. And the right honourable gentleman talked about acting in the national interest. Yes, we should be acting in the national interest, and the national interest is in getting a deal agreed with this Parliament, through this Parliament. That is why we are working with the European Union in everything that we're doing. And the right honourable gentleman made several references in his response to the issues of businesses and the issue of jobs and of protecting jobs. The deal we negotiated with the European Union, we're going back to deal with this issue of the backstop, but the deal we've negotiated, the political declaration that sets out the future, is a deal that protects jobs. And the one thing that we know would threaten jobs in this country would be a Labour government.
Mr. Kenneth Clarke.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, will recall that when we served together in the cabinet of the coalition government, that government was very enthusiastic about the prospects of negotiating EU trade deals with important trading partners around the world, and including the prospect of a trade deal with Japan. On the 1st of February, the Japan deal was concluded, and it is, in fact, I think, a deal which covers a bigger proportion of the global economy than any other trade deal negotiated so far. Does the Prime Minister aim to seek a customs arrangement which enables us to continue to enjoy or begin to get the benefits of this important deal after the 29th of March, or is she insisting that we've got to leave it and have our own trade policy and begin our own negotiations with a country which actually has a very much bigger economy than our own and is likely to demand from the United Kingdom concessions which it was not able to demand from the European Union?
say to my right honourable... Can I say to my right honourable and learned friend, of course, he is absolutely right that it is on the 1st of February that the EPA with Japan came into force. Of course, prior to that, we have been trading with Japan on World Trade Organisation arrangements. It has been the policy of the government in relation to the trade deals that have been agreed between the European Union and countries around the world that we seek continuity in those agreements at the point at which we leave the European Union, and have also been working to see continuity were we to leave with no deal. But we do also want to ensure that we can enhance our trade arrangements with countries around the world, and so then build our own trade agreements with those countries. And I think that is the best and most sensible approach, is to maintain trading relations as they are as we leave the European Union, and then build and enhance those trading relations with our own independent trade agreements.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, sometimes I think the Prime Minister must live in a parallel universe. We've just heard from the Prime Minister that she wanted this concluded in December. Mr. Speaker, talk about rewriting history. It was the Prime Minister that denied us the right to have the meaningful vote and to try and rewrite history, and she sits there laughing. You know, sometimes you should be honest with yourself, never mind being honest with the people of the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, here we are once again. A statement from the Prime Minister who's lost in a Brexit fantasy. We are 45 days from Scotland being dragged out of the European Union against our will. 45 days from economic catastrophe. She talks about Japan. Goods that could be leaving Japan in the next few days would arrive after that we leave the European Union. We don't know what the tariff regime would be from those importing cars or training shoes or whatever else. The ongoing mess of this government never ceases to amaze. Will the Prime Minister understand that EU leaders have refused to budge on any changes to the withdrawal agreement? Donald Tusk said on the 6th of February, the EU is not making any other offer. What from that statement does the Prime Minister not understand? Why does the Prime Minister not understand of this? The EU will not reopen the withdrawal agreement that she signed up to. Does the Prime Minister realise the danger of running down the clock? 45 days to go, and here we are with a government that can't even deliver a ferry contract. Prime Minister, your response to my letter requesting sight of what economic analysis have done on your own deal poses more questions than answers. The question is simple. Have you done an economic assessment of the impact of your deal on the UK economy? A simple yes or no. Prime Minister, you're asking this House to vote on your deal, and you can't even be honest about the economic impasse. You expect MPs to vote for this. Your binary choice, quite simply, is laughable. There is a growing number calling for an extension to Article 50. Prime Minister, extend Article 50 today. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's deal is a fraud. Ending freedom of movement, leaving the biggest trading bloc in the world. This will be catastrophic for Scotland. The UK is already suffering the cost of Brexit. Will the Prime Minister put an end to this economic madness? Prime Minister, as students get set for university applications and business owners look to prepare for the new financial year, your government is causing a new wave of uncertainty. We on these benches refuse to accept Scotland being dragged out of the European Union against our will. Ultimately, Scotland will have a choice: an independent European nation or remaining part of an inward-looking UK. Scotland's voices must be respected, Prime Minister.
Prime Minister!
The right honourable gentleman, I think that the points that he made are the same points he's been making in response to my statements, regardless of the content of my statements for some time now. He talked about the economic analysis. We did publish an economic analysis of the proposals that the government had put forward.
Order. There's plenty of scope for disagreement about what is true and what isn't true, but in fairness, I repeat the point that the person who has the floor must be heard. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that I think in his intervention from a sedentary position, he may have inadvertently misled the House on this matter. No. The government.
What was that? Order. I didn't. Forgive me. I didn't hear what was said. I hope the word liar wasn't used, but order. I'm perfectly capable of handling this matter with alacrity, and I shall do so. If that word was used without equivocation or qualification, that word must be withdrawn at once. At once. Order. If a member on the front bench used that word, I'm sorry, I'm not debating it, I'm not arguing, I'm not negotiating. That word must be withdrawn at once. Who was the person who used the word? I'm advised, I admit I didn't see which member used it. I'm advised, I think on good authority, that word was used by the leader of the Scottish National Party. If so, I want the debate to continue, and it will, but if so, I simply ask the right honourable gentleman to withdraw that word. He cannot accuse another member in this House of dishonesty. Withdraw.
In courtesy to yourself, I withdraw for courtesy to yourself.
No, there are plenty of precedents for that. I remember doing it once myself. And I remember a member of the Shadow Cabinet from West Bromwich once doing it out of deference to the chair rather than the person whom he'd been attacking. That's enough. That's enough. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if I could continue my explanation to the right honourable gentleman. As I said, the government put forward an economic analysis of the deal that the government had put forward. We did that in the economic analysis that was published earlier before the withdrawal agreement was put towards the House. What we also did in that was to recognise that the political declaration had areas within it which had not yet been confirmed, and there were variations in relation to the degree of friction across the border that would come from that. And we published that we could have taken a very low variation, which would have been very close to the government's deal on the economic analysis. We could have taken a high. We took a midpoint. I think that was entirely fair for the government to do. What the economic analysis of the deal that the government had put forward showed was that if you were going to honour the referendum, the deal that actually delivered best for the British economy was the deal that the government had put forward. Now, the right honourable gentleman also talks about putting an end to the current situation. Well, as I've indicated, we can indeed move forward when we agree a deal across this House. And if the right honourable gentleman is so concerned about avoiding no deal, I assume that when a deal is brought back from the European Union this next time, then he and his members of the SNP in this House will be voting for a deal in order to support the future of the United Kingdom. And then finally, once again, the right honourable gentleman talks about the economic impact on Scotland of leaving the European Union, and talks virtually in the same breath about his view that Scotland should be independent from the United Kingdom. And it may raise cheers on the SNP benches, but it wouldn't raise cheers from those people in Scotland whose economic future depends on being a member of the UK.
Order. Of course there is enormous interest, which, as per usual, I want to accommodate. Can I just appeal, please, to colleagues at this time, with the country watching us, let's have a robust but respectful debate. It is perfectly possible for colleagues to make their points with considerable force, but to do so with courtesy. And I know we'll be led in this matter by a former party leader and a notably courteous right honourable gentleman, Mr Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr Speaker, may I thank my right honourable friend for her statement. She referred during her statement to the successful amendment by my right honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West. That successful passage, she will recall, was heavily based on the thing that's now become known as the Malthouse Compromise. She's also said that yesterday this was discussed, this proposal, in Brussels with the Secretary of State and one of the negotiators. Therefore, for the avoidance of doubt, could she now confirm, therefore, that this proposal forms part of government policy?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, and I know because he has been involved in the meetings that have taken place with the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, looking at the proposals that have come to be known as the Malthouse Compromise. There have, of course, been a number of alternative arrangements that have been proposed over the past months. The possibility of alternative arrangements to replace the backstop is recognised by both the UK and the EU in the political declaration that was agreed in November. The proposals that have been tabled, there are some issues, there are some questions around the proposals that have been tabled. I raised the issue of alternative arrangements with the European Commission and the European Council and the European Parliament when I was there last week, and as I said, my right honourable friend was able to discuss these issues with Michel Barnier yesterday. But as I set out in my previous statement to the House, I think what people want to see across this House is to ensure that the backstop as it currently exists cannot become a permanent arrangement into which the United Kingdom could find itself. There are various ways of dealing with that, as I set out in my previous statement. One is to replace that backstop completely with alternative arrangements. Another is to ensure that the backstop can never be temporary. And those are the issues which have been discussed, but I have laid the Parliament's views very clearly before the European Union.
Sir Vincent Cable.
Now that the Prime Minister has reached out to the General Secretary of the United Union and the Leader of the Opposition and his entourage, she's no doubt better informed as to how Trotsky might have dealt with the Brexit crisis. But can she elaborate a little more on her discussions with the General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress and its 6 million affiliated members, and also the official Brexit spokesman of the Labour Party, who've made it very clear that the best way to protect workers' rights is to give workers a say on the final deal and the option of remaining in the European Union and keeping the workers' rights they already have.
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that the issues I have discussed, both with trade union leaders, with the Secretary-General of the TUC and with members across this House, is concerned to ensure that there is no reduction in workers' rights in the United Kingdom, a commitment which this government has given and will continue to meet.
Nicky Morgan.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I agree with the Prime Minister and have done for many months that the best way to avoid a no-deal outcome to Brexit is to have a deal put in place. And that's why I've been pleased at the request of the Prime Minister to work as part of the Alternative Arrangements Working Group. But isn't it now clear that actually to get that agreement through the House, those alternative arrangements are going to have to command the confidence of the majority of members on this side of the House and our confidence and supply partners, and of course some Labour MPs. But the tenor of the Leader of the Opposition's response today shows that, unfortunately, working on a cross-party basis is unlikely to both a vote for the agreement and certainly not continued votes for the necessary legislation. That is the reality of the parliamentary arithmetic, isn't it?
Well, can I first of all thank my right honourable friend for the work that she has been doing on the issue of alternative arrangements. I want to see a deal that can get through the House, supported by all members of my own party and by our confidence and supply partners. But it is actually, I think, in the interests of this Parliament and in the interests of taking legislation forward if we see a strong vote from across the whole House in relation to this issue. As my right honourable friend has said, the tone of the response by the Leader of the Opposition did not give much encouragement in relation to that issue, but we will continue to talk with the Labour Party front bench. As I said, the Brexit Secretary will be meeting and others, ministerial team, will be meeting with the Leader of the Opposition's team to take forward those discussions and to explore the issues that the Labour Party wish to raise.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. While strength in pursuit of a principle is to be admired, inflexibility and denial in the face of the facts is not, especially when the future of the country is at stake. And the facts are that alternative arrangements for the Northern Ireland border were examined extensively last summer and found wanting. The fact is the EU has made it clear that it will not reopen the withdrawal agreement. The fact is that the rolling over of the trade deals that the Father of the House referred to is not going well, and the fact is that businesses are spending millions of pounds and pulling their hair out because they fear the prospect of a no-deal Brexit on the 29th of March. I do not believe that the Prime Minister would do that to our country. I do not think that ministers would allow her to do it, so why does she continue to pretend that she might?
I have consistently said, I made the point, I think, in my statement this afternoon, that what I want, what the government wants, is a deal with the European Union. But there is only one way to ensure that we avoid no deal, and I know I say it a lot, and I know honourable members and right honourable members shout out at it and so forth, but if you don't want no deal, you have to agree a deal.
Mr. William Cash.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is facing intransigence both from the undemocratic EU and from MPs who voted for the Referendum Act, the Notification of Withdrawal Act and the Withdrawal Act itself and the repeal of the 1972 Act, and are now trying to reverse this with their own votes. She has not signed the withdrawal agreement, which itself has undemocratic and unconstitutional features, including the backstop and Article 4, which removes control over our lawmaking. Will she, therefore, if this undemocratic intransigence continues, walk away from the negotiations?
Can I say to my honourable friend, obviously what we are doing now is working with the European Union to achieve what this Parliament has said it wants to see achieved, notably legally binding changes that ensure legally binding changes to the backstop that deal with the issues that have been raised by this Parliament. I continue to work on those points, but my honourable friend made a very important point, I think, at the beginning of his intervention, which is that members across this House overwhelmingly voted for a referendum. It was clear at the time that this House would respect the result of the referendum. The government at the time made it clear we would respect the result of the referendum. This House overwhelmingly voted to trigger Article 50. Article 50 had a 2-year timeline to it, which ends on the 29th of March, and this House voted for the Withdrawal Agreement Act. So at every stage so far, this House has been willing to put into place the result of the referendum. What the House now needs to do, I believe, is to agree a deal so that we can leave on the 29th of March and progress on to the next stage of negotiations and progress on to a brighter future.
Yvette Cooper.
The country's counter-terror chief has said that no deal would be a very serious flaw in our security arrangements. The police chief in charge of preparing for Brexit has said that no deal would leave us less safe. She and I have always previously agreed on the importance of not undermining our national security or undermining public safety. But she knows that her continued delays have increased the risks of no deal on the 29th of March. So if she has failed by the middle of March to persuade this House to back a deal, is she still ruling out extending Article 50, yes or no?
Can I say to the right honourable lady, the extension of Article 50 is not something which solves the problem. If you the only way to solve a problem of not having no deal is to agree a deal. The right honourable lady says it is my delays that have caused the position that we are in. We're in this position because, yes, I negotiated a deal with the European Union. I brought it back to the House of Commons, and the House of Commons, including members on her side of the House, rejected that deal. We are now working to address the issue that has been raised by the House of Commons in the positive vote the House of Commons gave on the 29th of January, which ensured that it was clear that the changes that were necessary, what changes the House of Commons felt were necessary in order to be able to agree a deal.
Heidi Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We are all acutely aware that time is racing away, which is why more and more members are saying we must extend Article 50. We also need time for all the necessary legislation. Yes. So can the Prime Minister confirm to me that in the numerous statutory instruments being laid, which are not debated, there is not one planned for next week, when some MPs may be away, that would commit us to zero tariffs in the event of no deal? Because this would decimate our agricultural and food industries and start a race to the bottom. Such a significant decision would have far-reaching consequences and would demand full parliamentary scrutiny.
Can I say to my honourable friend, there will be a number of statutory instruments that this House will be addressing. This House will be working hard on those Brexit arrangements next week. On the issue of tariffs in the event of a no deal, there are still discussions being undertaken with businesses and other sectors.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to the question from my right honourable friend, can the Prime Minister now give millions of people and businesses up and down the country a simple answer to this straight question? If she is faced with a choice of leaving the European Union without a deal on the 29th of March or seeking an extension of Article 50, what will she do? We deserve to know the answer to that question.
And I might say to the right honourable gentleman, what I am doing is working to ensure that we can bring a deal back to this House, and it will then be for the right honourable gentleman and other members of this House to determine whether they want to support a deal with the European Union.
Mr. David Davis.
The Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the Liberal Party both implicitly criticised the UK government's record on workers' rights by comparison with Europe, both ignoring the most fundamental right, that of safety in the workplace, in which we have had the best record in Europe since we joined and in every year since. So there is little fear in this area. And given that, can she guarantee to the House that any future changes in this area will be subject to the control of this House?
Yes, my right honourable friend makes a very important point about the good record that this country has in relation to workers' rights. And I can confirm, I believe that this is an area where we should not just be automatically following what happens in Europe, but actually we should be making those decisions. I believe it's important that we in this country, we in this House make those decisions, and that our record of actually going further and having better workers' rights in a number of areas of the European Union, I think that makes sense.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
The Prime Minister referenced the fact that there are concerns in Northern Ireland about maintaining the seamless border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, but she should also reference, as she knows, the very great concern among many people in Northern Ireland about creating new barriers between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, given that we trade more with the rest of the United Kingdom than the Irish Republic, the rest of the EU and the rest of the world put together. Given that neither are necessary or needed under any scenario, can the Prime Minister confirm that, given that she knows what's needed and this House knows that what's needed to pass the withdrawal agreement, that the stance taken by Leo Varadkar, whom we met in Belfast on Friday in a very cordial meeting, but the stance being taken by him and others could lead to the very outcome which they say they wish to avoid?
The right honourable gentleman is, of course, absolutely right in relation to the concerns that have been expressed about the relationship between Northern Ireland and Great Britain in trading and the issue of potential regulatory barriers there, and it's an issue that he and I have discussed on a number of occasions. But he's also right, of course, we talk here about what it takes in this House to ensure that we agree a deal, but of course that deal has to be agreed with the European Union, and that means that all members of the EU27 have to agree that deal. And I was able to have cordial and constructive talks with the Taoiseach on Friday, as the right honourable gentleman has referenced his own talks. And I hope and trust, and I do believe, that all sitting around the table want to ensure that we deliver a deal that does deliver on the commitments of the people of Northern Ireland and that can pass this House and be agreed by the EU.
Boris Johnson.
I congratulate my right honourable friend on what she is doing to extricate this country from the humiliation of the backstop in accordance with the overwhelming wishes of this House. But can she confirm that there is no point in having a time limit on the backstop unless that is written into the treaty itself? And secondly, unless the end date falls substantially before the next general election?
Can I reassure my right honourable friend that I think, as he already knows, I want to see the future relationship coming in place by the beginning of 2021, so that is well in advance of the next general election. And the other point that he made is absolutely the point that I've been making to the European Union, that one of the concerns of this House was that any assurances that were given in relation to the temporary nature of the backstop in early January were not of the same legal form as the international treaty which forms the withdrawal agreement, and that is why what we are asking for is legally binding status to these, and the obvious way to do that is within the withdrawal agreement.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, the humiliation that this country faces is losing jobs and investment. That is the issue that we should be focusing on. To the Prime Minister, the Business Secretary told our Select Committee last week that this Friday, the 15th of February, is the deadline for getting a deal for businesses who export to the Far East, as shipments take 6 weeks to arrive. Does the Prime Minister agree with the Business Secretary, and can she guarantee that those free trade agreements that we enjoy today will still exist when those goods arrive on the 29th of March?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that we are very well aware of the timetables that businesses are working to. That is why we have been pressing and working hard to get the deal agreed by this House and the European Union. It is also the case that we are working on those trade agreements, and a number of continuity agreements have been signed with trading nations around the world to ensure that we can continue to trade on the current arrangements.
Dominic Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the categorical assurance that my right honourable friend has given to the House in respect of the House's ability to debate a neutral motion on Wednesday, the 27th of February. But time is very short. And can the Prime Minister explain to the House how we are going to comply with the provisions of the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, Section 20, if there is a deal, how we are going to implement the Withdrawal Agreement Implementation Bill and still leave on the 29th of March? Isn't it the case that, looked at realistically, there is going to have to be an application to extend the Article 50 process, even if my right honourable friend is successful in getting some kind of agreement through this House?
Thank you. Can I say to my right honourable and learned friend, obviously, as he said, the Withdrawal Act 2018 does make clear that the provisions of the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act 2010 which require the withdrawal agreement to be laid for 21 sitting days before Parliament will apply to the withdrawal agreement. In most circumstances, that period may be important in order for this House to have an opportunity to study the agreement. But of course, in this instance, MPs will already have debated and approved the agreement as part of the meaningful vote. So while we'll follow normal procedure if we can, where there's insufficient time remaining following a successful meaningful vote, we will make provision in the Withdrawal Agreement Bill with Parliament's consent to ensure that we're able to ratify on time to guarantee our exit in an orderly way.
Miss Samuel Roberts.
Let us remember what this looks like to anxious people outside this place. It looks like what it is. Prime Minister buying time in a disingenuous, transparent attempt to run down the clock and force MPs from all 4 nations of the UK to back her, with a no-deal, done deal looming large. Has she, at any point in her accelerated timeline, considered how and when she'll gain legislative consent from the devolved parliaments on the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, which will, no doubt, encroach on their competences?
I say to the right honourable lady, she talks about buying time. Now, what I'm doing currently is taking a very clear message given by this House of Commons to the European Union to negotiate changes to the deal such that this House of Commons will have the confidence and be able to agree that deal.
Dominic Raab.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement? Does my right honourable friend agree that requiring legally binding changes to the backstop is reasonable but also essential to passing that deal through this House? And while Brexit was the UK's choice, if Brussels remained stubbornly intransigent, a departure on WTO terms would be the EU's choice.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, the point he makes about the legally binding nature of the changes is an important one. This House has been clear about those issues, and as I indicated in an earlier response, it is this question of the different legal force of the commitments that have been made so far is the one that I have raised with the European Union, and the concern that the withdrawal agreement in the international treaty would currently take precedence over the legal assurances that were given in the separate letter about the temporary nature of the backstop. And it's that equivalence of legally binding nature to make sure that the withdrawal agreement cannot then trump anything extra that is important.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
House will have heard the Prime Minister's response to the honourable and learned member's important question about the Withdrawal Act implementation bill. And they will have heard the Prime Minister's response that she doesn't intend to honour the 21 days that it should be laid down. We haven't seen the draft of this bill, and yet it deals with very, very thorny issues about the divorce bill when we leave, EU citizens' rights, this is supremacy of European law during the transition period, and also the consent to remain under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice during that period as well. How on earth does the Prime Minister expect members on all sides of this House to consent to that legislation without seeing a draft at this moment in time? Will she not acknowledge that there is no chance that she's going to pass that legislation in 45 days' time? And on that basis, will she commit to extending Article 50 so this country does not crash out with no deal, threatening jobs right
I thank the honourable lady for her question. She's raised, obviously, an important point about this timetable, which was raised by my right honourable learned friend, the member for Beaconsfield. As I indicated, the 21 days that are in the CRAG are normally there because there hasn't been an opportunity for the House to actually see the nature of an agreement that it is looking at. In this case, of course, the House would have already had an opportunity to approve the agreement. The House has seen we're looking for changes in the agreement, but the vast majority of the agreement would not be changed in the discussions that we're having with the European Union, and the House has already been able to look at that as part of the meaningful vote. And I'm sure that when a meaningful vote has been agreed in this House, then every member of this House will want to ensure that they're able to operate on a timetable that enables us to leave at the end of the 2-year period agreed by this House when we triggered Article 50.
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is driving this House towards two options that the British people don't want. We've already voted against having a no-deal departure in this House. We've also already voted against massively her own prime ministerial deal from Brussels. She's simply just turned this exercise now into one of cobbling together enough votes to win a vote in this House, when actually we deserve so much more than that. It's not just about getting the ERG on board. It's not about just getting enough Labour MPs to switch sides. It's about getting the British people on board for the future that lies ahead. And that takes more than just votes in here, more than just the results of grubby backroom deals. Isn't it time that the only responsible action ahead of us, isn't it time to recognise that the responsible thing to do is to now go back to people and get their seal of approval?
I've responded to questions in this ilk from my right honourable friend on a number of occasions, and I have not changed my opinion. I believe it is important that this House recognises that, having given the choice to the British people as to whether to leave or stay in the European Union, the British people having chosen, we should respect that choice and we should deliver on that choice, and that's what we're doing.
Joanna Cherry.
I note that during her statement, the Prime Minister said that she had secured an agreement with the EU for further talks. And I'm sure she used the word talks advisedly, because when the Brexit Select Committee was in Brussels last week, we were told very clearly that the negotiations are over and that they ended in November when the Prime Minister shook hands on the deal to which she agreed. Now, isn't the reality quite simply this? That deal won't be changed by the EU. She can't get that deal through this House. So what she needs to do is put the deal to the people of the 4 nations of the United Kingdom.
I've just answered exactly that question in relation to a vote for the members, and my view on that has not changed in the 30 seconds or so since I asked it, my right honourable friend from Putney.
Mr. Owen Patterson.
The Malthouse Compromise, if adopted, would deliver the requirement of the amendment put down and passed by my right honourable friend, the member for Altrincham Sale West, to replace the backstop. So the Prime Minister's comments just now to my right honourable friends for Chingford, Woodford Green and Loughborough were really encouraging. Would she commit to instructing civil servants both in Brussels and in Westminster to working these proposals up into legal text?
Can I say to my right honourable friend that I believe he and some other of my right honourable friends had previously indicated to me that they understood that work that had been done by others outside this House had indeed contributed to a potential legal text. I know that meetings are continuing with officials to look at the issues that have been raised around the alternative arrangements. I've indicated what has happened in relation to those and Brussels, and we will continue to work on those alternative arrangements.
Chris Leslie.
So essentially, the Prime Minister is asking us, please can she have more time to convert those base metals into gold? But isn't it a complete fantasy to expect the Irish government to essentially put a time limit on the Good Friday Agreement? Nor should we expect them to do that. Unless colleagues across the House take some responsibility on Thursday and snap out of this delusion right now, we will be at the mercy of this Prime Minister's run-the-clock-down strategy.
I say, the right honourable gentleman, that he talks about the issue of the time limit, and that being he described it as a time limit on the Good Friday Agreement. No, it would not be a time limit on the Good Friday Agreement. This government remains absolutely committed to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and to the commitments and obligations that we have within that Belfast Good Friday Agreement. We also remain committed to ensuring there's no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And I have always said, as has the Taoiseach, that the best way of delivering that is in the future relationship, and that's what we're working to.
Sir Nicholas Soames.
Can I reassure the Prime Minister that I'm holding my nerve like anything? And would my right honourable friend therefore confirm that it remains at the heart of the government's policy in the national interest to secure a deal which at the end of the day will achieve the closest possible political, economic and security relationship with our friends and allies in the European Union?
Thank my right honourable friend for holding his nerve. Can I reassure him that what we are doing in negotiating this deal is ensuring that we deliver on the referendum. We'll be leaving the European Union, but they are our closest neighbours, and I believe it remains in the interest of this country and the European Union for there to be a close relationship between the UK and the EU in future. We've set out proposals for that close relationship for the future, and obviously the second stage of negotiations will be putting that relationship into legal text.
Kate Hoey.
Speaker, the Prime Minister was quite right to rule out, again, staying in a customs union, which wasn't on either of the two main parties' manifesto. But do you think we might perhaps change the wording in terms of talking about no deal, the customs union? Changing the wording on no deal, because if we cannot get an agreement, then surely we can go over to WTO and use Article 24. It's not crashing out. It's not. People voted to leave. They didn't vote for a deal as such. They voted to leave, and we need to leave on March the 29th.
Can I say to the right honourable lady, obviously she and a number of members of this House have raised the issue of World Trade Organisation arrangements. Of course, there are many parts of the world that we currently trade with on what are EU terms of trade rather than WTO terms, not just with the European Union. I continue to believe that the best route for this country is to leave with a deal, and that's why we're working so hard to get the changes this Parliament requested.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the tone that the Prime Minister struck in her meeting with businesses in Northern Ireland last week, where she indicated that she would be seeking changes to the backstop rather than its wholesale replacement. And is it worth underlining again today the reason why that backstop is there, the important purpose that it serves, namely locking in something good amidst all of the other uncertainty that's going on?
My right honourable friend makes a very important point. We all want to see the progress that has been made in Northern Ireland continuing, and actually the situation, the economic situation, and for people in Northern Ireland being enhanced and improved in the coming years. What happens at the border, the seamless border, is an important part of the progress that has been achieved, and I was pleased to be able to go to Belfast and reaffirm our commitment to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which is unshakable. There had been some concerns in Northern Ireland, but I was able to allay those concerns. This government remains absolutely committed to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the progress that has been achieved in Northern Ireland following that agreement.
Kendall.
The Prime Minister rightly said that the political declaration isn't legally binding. So can she guarantee that she will still be in her job when our future
future relationship with the EU is finally agreed? And if not, why would any of us take any of her assurances? Because she won't be the Prime Minister who does the final deal.
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that I am committed to ensuring that we are able to deliver on what we have in that political declaration, to negotiating a future relationship that actually delivers for the people of this country. And the Honourable Lady may shake her head on this point. It is important as we move forward that we are able to ensure that what is in that political declaration, there are elements of it that are still there for debate. And I recognise there will be rigorous debate on some of those elements. But what we want to do is ensure that when we come to the end of the implementation period, we have a future relationship that has that close economic and security relationship with the European Union.
Sir Desmond Swain.
I hope that there isn't a special place somewhere in particular for those of us who take a rather literal interpretation of the word replace.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, I think he's always held a special place in my estimation. And indeed in members across this House, and I wouldn't suggest that he would be going to any other special place.
Patricia Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents who live with serious health conditions are very concerned about disruption to the supply of medicines upon which they rely. Should doctors be writing prescriptions to permit patients to stockpile medical supplies, or can the Prime Minister today guarantee, a mere 45 days from Brexit, that there will be no disruption to medical supplies post-Brexit?
I say to the Honourable Lady that we're working obviously with suppliers who provide medicines to the UK to ensure that there will be continuity of supply, that patients would continue to receive the medicines they need in all scenarios, including in no deal, so that patients will not need to and should not seek to secure and store additional medicines at home. And we've already agreed that medicines and medical products, including medicines you can buy in the shops, will be prioritised to ensure that the flow of all these products will continue unrestricted after 29th of March 2019. And my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, has written to health and care providers in December about the preparations for no deal, and we've been discussing with the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government and the Northern Ireland Civil Service the arrangements that will pertain in those countries.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister tells us that she has a mandate to go back and renegotiate the backstop by virtue of the amendment that was passed on January the 29th. But, Mr. Speaker, by a bigger margin and on a cross-party basis, this place gave her another mandate, which was to take no deal off the table. So we have voted to reject her deal, and we voted to reject no deal. But instead, the Prime Minister not only is kicking the can down the road yet again, she again refuses to take no deal off the table. And this is in the face of the analysis and the advice of the civil servants who have informed the Cabinet, and they've debated, the profound bad consequences, in the words of the Business Secretary, the ruinous situation we would face in the event of no deal. Why and when, rather when will the Prime Minister publish that advice and that analysis so my constituents can understand why no deal is no option for this country?
To my right honourable friend, she's right obviously in terms of the votes that took place in this House. I would refer her to the fact that in the amendment that was voted on a cross-party basis in this House, as put forward by my right honourable and by my honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West, that also referenced the fact that this House wanted to leave the European Union with a deal. That is what we are working for. But I repeat for my right honourable friend, you cannot just say that we don't want to have no deal. You can only ensure there is not a no deal situation by agreeing a deal.
Laura Smith.
A common external tariff would mean reduced friction in goods trade, which
which would be hugely beneficial for our manufacturing sector. A new customs union would achieve this and would not, as I understand it, prevent us from striking our own trade deals in services. So why then is the Prime Minister ruling out this alternative arrangement for the backstop? And why is she so confident that the benefits of setting new tariffs outweigh the negative impact of increased friction and cost throughout the supply chains?
I have to say that I think the description that the Honourable Lady has given is not one that I recognise of the situation that she's put forward. If she cares to look at the political declaration, we actually make clear in the political declaration, we make clear in the political declaration the future relationship will have no tariffs, will have no quotas, will have no restrictions of that sort. And she says, well, why not a customs union? Because the customs union requires us not to be able to strike our own trade deals. The benefit of the deal that has been agreed, the benefit of the deal that the government first put forward, is that we achieve the benefits of no tariffs, no quotas, no restrictions, but at the same time as being able to negotiate our own trade deals.
Mrs. Anne Main.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has several times referred to having the need for legal certainty, and in response today from the Attorney General to a question I asked on this very matter, he suggested that they were always willing to assist the House in being able to find out that legal certainty. Can I ask that any changes that are negotiated are brought back to the House and that the Attorney General gives us the benefit of that advice, because the legal certainty is what is going to make many colleagues feel they can or cannot support something.
Can I say to my honourable friend, I recognise the concern that honourable members have on this matter of the legally binding nature of any changes that are achieved, and of course the Attorney General will make information available to this House to enable this House to take its decision.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Prime Minister is happy to kick the can down the road for yet another 2 weeks. Over 3 million EU nationals are living in appalling uncertainty. And as it stands, the Home Office's EU settlement scheme could leave potentially hundreds of thousands of EU nationals undocumented and at risk from the hostile environment. So will she accept that only a declaratory system under which those resident in the UK before March the 29th are automatically granted leave to remain, only that would protect all citizens' rights, as she has claimed that she wants to do?
Lady, we have put forward a very sensible and reasonable scheme. We have said that we will guarantee rights for EU citizens here in the UK, even in the event of a no deal. So it isn't just something that would pertain in the event of a deal. As the Honourable Lady will know, we have already announced that there will be, from the full rollout of the settlement scheme, there will be no fee required, and we'll reimburse any fees that have been paid in the pilot periods of that. But we do retain the right to ensure that it is possible that this country can determine that individuals who perhaps have a particular criminal record are not in this country. That's a right that we look at across the board. And so the sort of situation that she suggests, I think, is not right. We have a very good scheme. We have a good scheme that's easy to use and will be at no charge.
Jim Graham.
Mr. Speaker, I'm more optimistic than other members of the Brexit Select Committee. I believe that the EU can and will agree to make legally binding changes that enable the Attorney General to give revised advice on our not being tied indefinitely into a customs union and against our will. But if my right honourable friend comes back to the House with these changes, at that stage surely it is all of our responsibility as MPs to support the bill, get the business done and accept responsibility for that. Does my right honourable friend agree that any attempt to pre-position ourselves as members blaming the EU for no deal would be an absolutely severe dereliction of duty?
I certainly agree with my honourable friend that at the point at which a meaningful vote is brought back to this House, it will be the responsibility of every member of this House to determine their vote according to the nature of that deal and, of course, according to the views that they feel about no deal. And it is the case that the only way to avoid no deal, other than, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I may inadvertently have misled the House myself earlier when I said the only way to avoid no deal was to agree a deal. Of course, it is possible to avoid no deal by staying in the European Union, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that because that would be going back That would be going back on the vote of the people of this country. We will be leaving the European Union, and when the deal comes back, it will be the responsibility, as my honourable friend says, of every member of this House to determine whether or not we move forward with that deal.
Ben Bradshaw.
With the Prime Minister recklessly running down the clock to a crash-out Brexit, can I say to the responsible members of her government that if they fail to act soon to prevent such a calamity, history will judge them very, very harshly. But can I also say to my own front bench, now that the government have rejected our offer, if they fail to honour the unanimously agreed policy at our conference in favour of a public vote, they too will be judged very harshly by history.
Can I say, Mr. Speaker, I think the second part of that question was not addressed to me, so I will not be responding to it. But the right honourable gentleman stands up and says that we are recklessly running down the clock in order to crash out with no deal. That is not the case. If that was the case, I wouldn't be spending time talking to EU leaders, going to Brussels, going to Dublin, trying to work a way that we can find to deliver on a deal that respects the concerns raised by this House and that will get through this Parliament.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you. The organisation Leave Means Leave is telling my constituents that we can walk away from the EU with no agreement, but also be a global champion for free trade. Does my right honourable friend agree that this is totally illogical and that if we want to be a global champion for free trade, our first act should be to agree an agreement with our largest trading partner?
I think my honourable friend has made an important point, which is that if it is the case that we believe that we want to make trade agreements with countries around the world on terms other than WTO terms, then it also makes sense to make a trading agreement, and we have a very good one proposed by the government, with the European Union, and that's what we'll work to achieve.
Speaker, the Prime Minister might remember I congratulated her on trying to speak to a wider group of people and to speak to the opposition and do all those things that she started. From where I'm standing, I don't think she's completed that job. I actually thought there were some good signs this week that there was a discourse and an exchange of views, and we could have seen that in this House, actually, there is probably a majority for a sensible course forward. On the other hand, can I remind her that outside there, since the referendum, there's been a fantastic change in the national mood. As I go around and as I speak to people, reasonable people, not the extremists, I find an urgent desire to get this sorted with a second referendum and a people's vote.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that certainly when I go on the doorsteps, I do get from people an urgent desire to get this sorted, not to get a second referendum and a people's vote, but actually to deliver on the first vote and to do so and leave the European Union on the 29th of March.
John Barron.
Prime Minister is absolutely right to hold her nerve. The EU could write the textbook on 11th hour deals. Most colleagues in this place prefer a good deal to no deal. But can she reassure the House that should we leave on the 29th of March on no-deal WTO terms, we are sufficiently prepared?
We are indeed. We've ramped up our preparations. We are continuing our preparations for no deal. We're obviously engaging not just with government departments, we're engaging with devolved administrations, with the Northern Ireland Civil Service, we're engaging with local authorities up and down the country, and obviously working with businesses and those who would need to make alterations to their operations in the event of no deal, and we continue to ramp up those preparations.
Angela Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. We hear a lot about the reasons or the assumed reasons why people voted to leave the EU. But one thing I am sure about, the people of this country are demanding effective leadership on this issue, and they feel absolutely they're not getting it from anywhere on the political landscape. Anywhere on the political landscape. Can I ask the Prime Minister, if her attempts to keep her party together by getting the ERG on board fail, will she accept at that point the need to build a consensus properly across the House, and that the easiest way potentially of reaching that consensus will be to get her deal over the line as it stands now by accepting the case for putting it to the people for ratification.
To the honourable lady that I think she and I do have a different view in relation to a second referendum. As I've expressed earlier, I think it's important that we deliver on the first the referendum that took place in 2016. But it is also important that as we do that, we do it on a way that actually commands, obviously we need to command support from this House. I want to see support from across this House. I think a strong show of support for a deal across the whole House will be important as we move forward into dealing with the legislation, and for other reasons too. I naturally want my colleagues and our confidence and supply partners to support the deal, but as I say, I look to having a deal that I can bring back that will command strong support across the House.
Richard Drax.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has repeatedly said that no deal is better than a bad deal. Now, the last deal she put to the House failed, and I welcome her attempts to go back to the EU to strike a better deal. But does she agree with me that to get that better deal, you've got to keep no deal on the table as a negotiating tool? Take it off, and no deal, fair deal, will be struck.
Agree with my honourable friend that we do need to ensure that when in the negotiations people recognise the options that are available. And as I've said to a number of members, we're not going to stay in the European Union, so the only other way of not having no deal is to agree a deal. We can't simply say we don't want no deal and then not deliver a deal that ensures that we don't have no deal.
Wilson.
The European Commission this week published a document spelling out the implications of the withdrawal agreement and made it quite clear that Northern Ireland would have to maintain specific regulatory alignment with the EU, and the EU Customs Code would continue to apply to Northern Ireland, and that would mean systematic checks on all goods travelling from the rest of the UK to Northern Ireland at all ports and airports. That would rip apart the United Kingdom. To use the Prime Minister's own words, will she ensure that that must not happen and that will not happen?
To the honourable gentleman that I'm as clear as he is that we want to ensure that we will keep the United Kingdom together, and it was precisely in order to avoid the sort of customs border between GB and Northern Ireland that led to us negotiating the UK customs-wide territory in the withdrawal agreement, in the backstop as it currently appears in the withdrawal agreement. And in the issue in relation to regulatory changes, of course, we have indicated commitments that the UK government would be able to make in relation to that situation, as we as we would be respecting what we committed to in the December joint report. But we will I'm absolutely clear that everything that this government will be doing to ensure that we keep the United Kingdom together. That means keeping Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom, England, Scotland and Wales as well.
Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, in particular her very clear exposition of why she doesn't want to remain in the customs union because it would materially fetter our ability to do international trade deals in our own right. She is absolutely correct in that. And can I ask her to confirm that that position is wholly consistent with the 2017 Conservative manifesto and therefore will enjoy strong support from all sides of these benches, whether we have been sent to hell or not?
I believe it is consistent with the manifesto that we set out. It is also consistent with the original set of principles that I set out in the Lancaster House speech, which many members of this House refer to.
Mr.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has talked about wanting to achieve an orderly Brexit, but the Public Accounts Committee has carried out a lot of work showing that even with a deal, Brexit will be far from orderly. So in the light of that and the points raised by the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Beaconsfield, about the constitutional challenge of getting it through, will she commit today to not ruling out extension of Article 50 to make sure that whatever happens, this country is prepared?
We will ensure that this country is prepared. The right honourable lady refers to the issue of an orderly Brexit, it is precisely the deal that we negotiated, setting aside the issue of the backstop and the changes that are required by this House in relation to that matter, does provide for the implementation period, which provides that orderly progression onto the future relationship. That's what we're working for, and that's what I hope this House will find its way to agreeing.
Zach Goldsmith.
Can the Prime Minister be absolutely clear that when we leave the European Union, our environmental standards in this country will rise, not fall?
First of all, we are committed to ensuring that our environmental standards do not fall. And I believe it is in the interest of this country and the desire, indeed, of this House and this country to see that we enhance our environmental standards in the future. And I would say to my honourable friend that I think the government has shown its commitments through our 25-year environmental strategy, through the Environment Bill that my right honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, will be bringing forward in a number of ways. We're showing the commitment we have to enhanced environmental standards.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A close member of my family suffers from ulcerative colitis and is also a serving police officer. They have been told that they may not be able to access the medicine that they need to keep them well on a day-to-day basis. So what does the Prime Minister say to my family member and to the many thousands of people across the UK who have chronic illnesses, some of which are exacerbated by anxiety and uncertainty? As she recklessly goes towards a no deal by threatening members, she needs to think again. What impact assessment has she done for people like my family member suffering from chronic illness?
Can I say to the honourable lady, she raised a point which was raised by one of her honourable friends earlier, and I responded to that by making absolutely clear the work that we've been doing with suppliers of medicines to ensure that there will be continuity of supply and that patients will continue to receive the medicines they need in all scenarios, including in a no-deal scenario. And I also say to the honourable lady that when we are able to bring a deal back that deals with the issues that have been raised by this House, she and every member of this House will have the responsibility of determining whether they want to leave the European Union with a deal or without a deal.
Martin Vickers.
Mr. Speaker, one of the opportunities to boost our coastal communities post-Brexit is the establishment of free ports, something that port operators will not consider once we are members of the Customs Union. So I welcome my right honourable friend's reaffirmation that we will indeed be leaving the Customs Union. Can she give an absolute assurance that she will not concede further on this with any future customs arrangements that she may negotiate so that we can move ahead to establish free ports?
I know my honourable friend has had a great interest in free ports for some time and has been promoting the concepts of free ports, and it's one that is shared, I know, by our mayor up in Tees, Ben Houchan, in relation to this issue. And this is one of those interesting areas. There are, I think, issues that always need to be addressed in relation to free ports, but it is an interesting issue that we would want to be looking at.
Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In her statement on the 21st of January, the Prime Minister told those in the House that she would look for further ways to engage with regional representatives in England. Last week, in response to a written parliamentary question from me, she said this wouldn't happen until the next phase. So, in other words, after we have left the EU. How does the Prime Minister expect to build support across the House when she shows this level of contempt for those regions of this country that will be worst affected by it?
Can I say to the honourable lady that that is not the case? And I would just gently remind her that members of this House represent all parts of the United Kingdom. We are talking with trade unions, we're talking with businesses about the impact of decisions that are being made on parts of the United Kingdom. As I indicated in my statement, what we want to, I committed when I became Prime Minister to a country that works for everyone. That's what we continue to work for.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it not the case that there is a precedent in the EU for member states which have been unable to ratify a treaty because of a democratic decision taken in their own country to go back to the EU and secure important changes? One country did so, having failed to agree the Lisbon Treaty through a referendum and secured legally binding changes by way of a protocol. The EU agreed those, and that country was Ireland.
My right honourable friend is absolutely. My right honourable friend is absolutely right that there is precedent for a situation in which a country has said that it is not able to accept the terms of a particular agreement and go back to the European Union and negotiate different terms.
Ah, yes, the President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, President Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has made great statements about honouring the referendum. But the thing I'm asked most often by colleagues across Europe, but also by people in my constituency, is what selective process the Prime Minister used in honouring what votes. Because we had an election in 2015 and the Prime Minister didn't like the result. So she went back to the people in 2017. We had a vote about her deal and it was rejected. Now we're having to look at it again with small alterations. We voted against no deal, and yet the Prime Minister is not implementing that. So how do voters in my constituency, how do people across Europe who watch what happens in this House have any trust in that whatever deal is put on the table will be binding for the future and won't be altered should the UK leave the European Union?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that at the 2017 general election, 80% of the people who voted for parties who were committed to honouring the result of the referendum and taking Britain, the United Kingdom out of the European Union. And that's exactly what we as government are working to do. And she again makes reference to this issue of no deal and not having a situation of no deal. You can't simply take no deal off the table. As I said, if you're not going to stay in the European Union, the only way to ensure that there is not a no deal is to have a deal.
Nigel Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surely the backstop has become a sort of unnecessary nightmare for all of us because we don't know what the future trading relationship will be between the UK and the EU 27. So if Brussels dig their heels in on not giving the small concession the Prime Minister is seeking, would she seek to go into an implementation period post-March the 29th for the 20-month period, in which time we can then negotiate the future trading relationship?
I thank my right honourable friend. We will, of course, we will indeed, I think, have an opportunity during that implementation period to negotiate the details of that future trading relationship. I expect that to be done by December 2020, such that then we are able to put that future relationship into place.
Jay Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was glad the Prime Minister mentioned her support for the Liberal Democrat policy of shared parental leave.
Yeah.
But does she remember, as I do, her Conservative colleagues who fought tooth and nail against it? Does she remember the Beecroft report, an extensive Conservative assault on workers' rights stopped by the Lib Dems? Outside of the EU, there is nothing to stop a future Conservative Prime Minister tearing up her legal commitments. There is no Brexit that can guarantee workers' rights, and that is why we need a people's vote.
Can I say to the right honourable lady that we are giving those commitments in relation to workers' rights? Can I also say to the right honourable lady, actually I was the person within the Conservative Party who ensured the Conservative Party's policy was for flexible working for all and for shared parental leave.
Sir David Evans.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement today and pay tribute to her determination and commitment to get a good withdrawal deal and to ensure that we leave the EU on the 29th of March. Does she appreciate the strength of feeling in my constituency against the backstop proposal and confirm she has listened to those concerns and will continue to pursue a real and constructive change in these arrangements?
I can give my honourable friend that assurance. I've heard the message clearly that Parliament gave in relation to the backstop, and we are working for those legally binding changes that this Parliament wishes to see.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Withdrawal Agreement Implementation Bill is legislation of the highest political, legal and constitutional significance. It's absolutely vital that this House has sufficient time to debate and scrutinise it. It would be a constitutional outrage if that were not the case. Does the Prime Minister not then agree that it is crystal clear that we cannot do justice to this vitally important piece of legislation without an extension of Article 50?
I assure the honourable gentleman, of course, the House will have looked at the nature of the withdrawal agreement through the meaningful vote that it conducts, and giving support for that withdrawal agreement will then enable us to get on with the withdrawal agreement implementation bill. And I can assure the honourable gentleman that the House will have sufficient time, I believe, to scrutinise that bill.
Mr. Speaker, would the Prime Minister agree that talking about helping left-behind areas is not something that should be seen as a tactical matter to get through a withdrawal agreement, but it should be at the very heart of what this government is about, promoting a renaissance of the regions as part of building Brexit Britain. And that means every region, including coastal towns like Dover and Deal that I represent.
My honourable friend made an important point. When I stood on the steps of Downing Street the first day I became Prime Minister, I was very clear that I wanted to ensure that we worked for those communities who did feel that they were left behind, who did feel that they hadn't achieved the benefits that they'd seen some other parts of the country have. And that does mean certain parts of the country. It also means certain types of town, like coastal towns like Dover and Deal that my honourable friend represents and champions so well.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the statement the Prime Minister has given today and the lack of concrete progress, it feels as if the Prime Minister is purposefully making Parliament hit its head against a brick wall in the hope that when we stop, we might feel better. We are less than 45 days away from exit day, and yet the Prime Minister is picking and choosing which of the directions from this House that she listens to. This House overwhelmingly said it wanted to reject no deal. Please, Prime Minister, stop being so stubborn and focusing on buying fridges and fantasy ferries, and at least admit that extending Article 50 would help this House take back control.
What this House voted for was an amendment which confirmed avoiding a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, confirmed that this House wished to leave with a deal, and confirmed the issue that needed to be addressed for this House to agree a deal, and that was the issue of the backstop.
Greg McKinley.
Mr. Speaker, I visited Brussels last week as a member of the Brexit Select Committee, and we met Martin Selmayr. Now, whether I believe him or not is another matter, but he explained to us that he could see no reason why the Commission would ever want to use the backstop. 2 weeks ago, in the government supporting the Brady Amendment, I have to assume the government doesn't want the backstop. Parliament doesn't want the backstop. The Northern Ireland public and the public across the rest of the UK don't want the backstop. Could I ask my right honourable friend, why is it still there?
Can I say to my honourable friend, nobody wants to use the backstop. The reason the backstop is there is that it is the guarantee that there will be no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland in the circumstances in which the future relationship has not come into place at the end of the implementation period. Now, there is an alternative that is available within the withdrawal agreement, which is a further extension of the implementation period. There are pros and cons in both of these positions. Of course, we want to see change to the backstop, but there are issues around the fact that in an implementation period there would almost certainly be a request for money, which doesn't occur in relation to the backstop, but it's there as that guarantee. It's like an insurance policy. You take it out, but you never want to have to use it.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, a recent national opinion poll in Northern Ireland stated that 60% of those polled were clearly against the backstop, a majority of opinion. Is the EU policy on the backstop like that Great Eagles song, Hotel California? You can check out any time you like, but you can't leave. And can the Prime Minister give an assurance to unionists in Northern Ireland that there can be no progress unless the backstop is removed or is time limited?
The honourable gentleman has made the point clearly that, in fact, it is this House that has said that it requires changes to be made to the backstop, legally binding changes, and that's what we're working for.
Alex Chalk.
Speaker, I have constituents working at GE Aviation, BAE Systems, Spirax, Sarco, JLR, Honda. Those businesses urgently need certainty. What assurances can the Prime Minister provide that the talks are credible and constructive, not cosmetic, and can reasonably be expected to yield progress?
I say to my honourable friend that the talks I had last week, I think, indicated from the point of the European Commission that they do indeed want to ensure that we can leave with a deal. They have extended those talks. Previously, there had been indeed some unwillingness to extend the talks, but now that Parliament has shown what it specifically wants to see changing in the withdrawal agreement, then we are able to have those talks and to explore the various ways in which we can ensure we deliver a deal that this Parliament can support.
Martin Doherty-Hughes.
The Prime Minister assured the House on the 14th of January that the right to be British or Irish or both in Northern Ireland was clear and referenced by a withdrawal agreement. Yet in Belfast on the 2nd of February stated, "I know that in some cases recently, people have encountered difficulties in securing their Irish rights as Irish citizens." Therefore, does the Prime Minister recognise and agree that Emma de Souza and many others in Northern Ireland are Irish citizens and therefore EU citizens, all the while the Home Office claims they're British?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, he's raised an issue which, as I said, first of all, it is absolutely clear the position of people in Northern Ireland to be Irish or British or indeed both is very clear in the withdrawal agreement, is maintained in that withdrawal agreement. There has been an issue raised in relation to a small number of cases about the interaction of that with the immigration rules that we apply here in the United Kingdom, and that's what the Home Secretary is working on.
Evan Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, but would she agree with me that extending Article 50 just to have more months of procrastination to allow some people to carry on dishing out the sound bites rather than voting for solutions would be of no use to us, no use to the EU and no use to our economy either?
My honourable friend makes a very important point. Extending Article 50 doesn't solve the issue. It just extends the length of time of consideration being given. The point will still have to come where members of this House would have to make a decision and exercise respect their responsibilities. And he references the economy. Actually, businesses have said to me that they don't want to see Article 50 extended because they feel that would extend that period of discussion and uncertainty, and they want a deal delivered and a deal agreed.
Caroline Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, it is understandable that my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, is wary. But he knows that in the general election, Labour promised to respect the outcome and work for a deal. So I hope he will take every opportunity that is offered to him to talk to government, to talk to officials with the Shadow Base Secretary, to hold the government to account and the Prime Minister account on what promises she's made in her statement today, particularly on workers' rights. But does the Prime Minister share my concerns about the downturn in economic growth? Since the referendum, 2,000 new jobs have been created in my constituency at Doncaster Port. And it seems to me that it is indecision, not Brexit per se, that is now holding back business. It is absolutely essential that we face compromise in a straightforward way and seek a deal. There are some in this House who say take no deal off the table, but for them, no deal is ever going to be a winner. So I would ask the Prime Minister to reiterate that across Parliament we have to do what business and our communities want and reach a compromise and get a deal done sooner rather than later.
Well, the Right Honourable Lady makes a very important point, which is that it is in the interests of business, it is in the interests of communities to get a deal agreed so that we can move forward. And I believe there are businesses who are waiting, who are holding back investment in this country, waiting for us to get the deal over the line, and that investment will be made when we get that deal. And it is for every member of this House to be prepared to accept, as the Right Honourable Lady has said, that we are all making compromises. The agreement with the European Union involves some compromise. That is because it's two sides coming together to agree a deal, but it's in the best interest of this country to have that deal and to get it sorted.
Jeremy Lefroy.
I entirely support what the Right Honourable Lady from Don Valley has just said. This morning I met with the representative of a large manufacturer in my constituency who are incredibly concerned about what would happen in the case of a no deal. But I want to ask my Right Honourable friend if she could lay out quite clearly the consequences of no deal for our vital services sector, in which we have a trade surplus both with the EU and across the world, and which is responsible for the jobs of so many millions of our fellow citizens.
Well, there is absolutely no doubt that no deal, of course, would have an impact on our economy. I think in the longer term, we would be able to recover from that impact. There have obviously been a number of academic studies and others that have set out and made assessments of the impact of no deal. I believe obviously, as my honourable friend has said, the services sector is very important for us. That is why I believe the proposals that we have in the political declaration, the deal we have in the political declaration, which gives us that flexibility in terms of developing our services, including financial services, is so important for the future.
And Catherine West.
Brexit has evoked many emotions: anger, sadness, and last week the Prime Minister was in Ireland. Does the government care about breaking Irish hearts?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady that when I was in Ireland and met with the Taoiseach, we were discussing not only the issue of the backstop and getting a deal with the European Union such that we can get that deal agreed through Parliament, but also the future relationship between the UK and Ireland. And as obviously having the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, so a land border with Ireland, a continuing member of the EU27, but also a close neighbour, we want to ensure that we can enhance and build on the very good relations that we've had between the UK and the Irish government in recent years and build on those relations for the future. So I will be with us.
Carol Monaghan.
Mr. Speaker, political leaders across Europe have been unanimous in stating that the Prime Minister's deal, the deal that was overwhelmingly rejected by this House, was the only deal possible because of the Prime Minister's own red lines. So we're now in the terrifying situation that in 45 days we could crash out with no deal. She's heard members this afternoon on both sides calling for an extension to Article 50. So could the Prime Minister now tell the House how many votes she is happy to lose before she considers extending Article 50?
I've set out the procedure that the government is going to follow in relation to this issue, and we continue to work to be able to bring back a deal for a meaningful vote.
Toby Perkins. Very much, Mr. Speaker. The Food and Drink Federation today have said that the industry faces its biggest catastrophe since 1939 if we were to leave without a deal, and yet the government still haven't even reached a deal that we can agree on here, much less take it to Europe. How do I justify to my constituents with all of that why this Parliament shut at 3:27 last Wednesday because the government had literally nothing for MPs to discuss?
To the honourable gentleman that, of course, Parliament is more than many things happen in Parliament and take place in Parliament, which is not just in this chamber. But can I also say that the honourable gentleman might wish to point out to his constituents that the government has taken the decision of not enabling the honourable gentleman to have a recess next week because there is business for this Parliament to do, and we will be doing that business.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister is serious about meeting the 29th of March deadline, will she allow this House to get on and do what it's here to do instead of filling our time with general debates and statutory instruments? If we're coming back next week instead of recess, will we deal with the Agriculture Bill, the Fisheries Bill, the Immigration Bill, the Financial Services Bill, the Healthcare Bill, or will we ever see the Withdrawal Agreement Bill? Mr. Speaker, if we are to leave on the 29th of March, these matters will all have to be dealt with here and in the other place. Why does the Prime Minister not just accept what is obvious to the rest of the world and start now the process for an orderly extension of the Article 50 period?
To the right honourable gentleman, the immigration bill, I believe, is in committee today, so work is being done on the immigration bill. Yes, he says it's in committee. That's the normal procedure of the House of Commons, that having had a second reading, it goes into committee. Can I also say to the right honourable gentleman that next week there will indeed be many statutory instruments that relate to Brexit that are important preparations for this House to make. And he talks about bringing forward a withdrawal agreement bill. We can't have a withdrawal agreement bill until we have the withdrawal agreement. So I assume if he wants the bill, he's going to support the withdrawal agreement.
McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker,
We were told we would see the final report on anti-dumping duties on aluminium foil by Christmas, and entirely predictably, we haven't seen anything at all. Now, that's very niche, but for a company in my constituency, it's extremely important. And it's just one example where businesses are being left in a state of hopeless uncertainty because of the government's failure to prepare for Brexit. Isn't it time that rather than letting businesses continue in this state, the Prime Minister announces that she will extend Article 50?
Minister. As I've just indicated, actually, there are businesses that are saying to me that Article 50 extension does not solve the problem for them, in that what they want to see is a deal agreed by this Parliament, and then a deal that's been negotiated with the EU, agreed by this Parliament, and then being able to being put into place.
Chris Stevens.
Bring the Prime Minister back to the section of the statement on workers' rights. She'll be aware that currently the European Parliament and the European Commission are negotiating for better and stronger workers' rights on workers in the gig economy and for working parents, which are far better and stronger than those found in the current UK Government's Good Work Plan. So can I ask the Prime Minister, if Europe agrees to those new regulations, that the UK Government will implement them for working people in the United Kingdom?
Yeah. What I've said in the statement, what we've indicated, is that if there are future changes in the European Union to workers' rights that change those workers' rights, then we're committed to giving Parliament the opportunity to say whether the United Kingdom would support those rights.
Owen Smith.
Mr. Speaker, it is patently obvious that the Prime Minister's tawdry strategy is now to string this out to the last second in an attempt to blackmail and bully MPs into supporting this deal. Can I reassure her that I will take her advice, I will hold my nerve, and I will refuse to bend the knee to this job-destroying Brexit? And can I urge my front bench to do likewise, to refuse to vote for it and instead to honour our conference commitment to holding a public vote on this deal?
Hear, hear. The honourable gentleman talks about the impact of not having come to a deal at this stage, and then in his question wants to go into a situation where we don't have a deal, where we don't have agreement across this House, and where there's an extension of the time and the uncertainty that he's already referred to. I don't think that a people's vote, a second referendum, is the right way forward for the reasons that I've indicated earlier. I believe what people want us to do is deliver on the referendum and get on with it.
Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Mr. Speaker, what progress, if any, has the EU signalled to the Prime Minister may be possible on the backstop to date?
That's precisely what we're talking to the European Union about, is about how we can resolve the issue of the backstop in a way that will command the support of this Parliament. We have agreed that we will enter those talks, and that's exactly what we're discussing.
Mike Capes.
Mr. Speaker, the European Union and all the people speaking for it in the different institutions have made absolutely clear that the withdrawal agreement negotiated by this Prime Minister, agreed by this Prime Minister, signed off by this Prime Minister, is not going to be amended. But this House has rejected the withdrawal agreement. Isn't the only way out of this now, and this gives the Prime Minister what she wants, for this House to adopt the negotiated withdrawal agreement with a sunset clause and put it to the people in a referendum whether they accept it or whether they wish to remain in the EU with the better deal we have now?
To the honourable gentleman, I think I refer him to the answers that I've given earlier in relation to the issue of a second referendum.
Yeah. Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Prime Minister has said repeatedly that she won't go back and give the country the choice of whether or not this is actually what they want, given that she said repeatedly that she doesn't want to extend Article 50, and given that she refuses to take no deal off the table, what advice would she give to those tens of thousands of UK students currently studying in the EU, those British holidaymakers who've already made arrangements and who may have chronic health conditions and find that they may not be able to get cover?
Absolutely.
I say to the honourable lady that, of course, she indicates, I think, the concerns that she has about the prospect of leaving with no deal. There is an answer to ensuring that we don't leave with no deal, and that is to agree a deal.
Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, the duty of any government is to keep its citizens safe, and surely there can be no compromise on that. So is the Prime Minister really saying that despite all the warnings about crashing out with a no deal from the police and the security services to our national security, that she is willing to allow us to crash out on the 29th of March rather than extend Article 50?
What I'm saying is that the first aim of this government must be what we are doing, which is negotiating a deal, changes to the deal with the European Union that can be brought back to this House, that can command the support of this House.
Tom Brake.
No fewer than 8 government ministers have described no deal in terms such as catastrophic, a betrayal, disastrous, the worst possible outcome. Why is the Prime Minister still playing Russian roulette with the option of no deal? And at what stage of this lethal game does she expect those ministers to resign from her government? Perhaps that should be on Thursday, when Parliament has the opportunity to find a way of ruling out no deal once and for all.
The Right Honourable Gentleman says that Parliament would find a way of ruling out no deal once and for all. There are only 2 ways in which we can ensure that we don't have a no deal situation. One is to stay in the European Union. The Right Honourable Gentleman might want to do that. Yes, he says absolutely from a sedentary position. That is not the result of the referendum. The government will deliver on the result of the referendum and we will leave the European Union. The only other way of ensuring that we don't have no deal is to agree a deal. And that seems to be pretty obvious to me.
Well, I think the proper response to the Honourable Lady's sneeze is bless you. Dr Rupa Haque.
Mr. Speaker, we are now 45 days away from projected closure date and we still have no clarity and no closure on a deal that the Prime Minister negotiated 135 days ago. Can I ask for her opinion on this statement that's from the innocent days when it was only 110 days ago, on the eve of the last pooled vote in December? If Parliament doesn't agree a Brexit deal soon, then we must recognise that the original mandate to leave, taken over 2 years ago, will begin to date and will eventually no longer represent a reflection of current intent. Not my words, Mr. Speaker. These are the words of the honourable and gallant member for Bournemouth. If her own government members get it, why won't she? And can she not see why the general public see that her only strategy is really just to run down the clock?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, the government's position is very clear. We believe it is better for this country to leave with a deal. That is the position that the House of Commons has taken, but the House of Commons has also said that it does not agree the deal that was negotiated. It wants to see changes to the backstop, and that's what we're working for.
James Heapy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has taken many questions encouraging that she end uncertainty by taking no deal off the table, but there are many others that encourage her to create more uncertainty by extending Article 50 or calling for a second referendum. The Lib Dems managed to advocate both in the same question. Does she share my confusion over the uncertainty amongst those who oppose Brexit over whether uncertainty is acceptable or not?
Here, 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 here.
Can I say to my honourable friend, I think he has very neatly pointed out the contradiction in many of the contributions that have been made in this House today.
Martin Whitfield.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has spoken about a country that she wants to work for everyone. And indeed, in her speech, she said that the damage that would be done to the public faith in our democracy. So what is her message to the 48.1% who voted Remain, who didn't get a mention in her statement?
And the others who felt they'd been right. Say to the honourable gentleman that the deal that the United Kingdom government has been pursuing is one that respects the result of the referendum, that does it in a way that protects jobs, protects our security and protects the union of the United Kingdom. I believe that is the deal that is right for everyone across the United Kingdom.
Gethins.
Mr. Speaker, last week my constituent Karen Vaughan had to travel to a registration centre in Edinburgh from the village of Letham in Fife. Mrs Vaughan moved to the UK 74 years ago when she was 3 months old. Her village is very, very angry. She's upset. What's the Prime Minister's message to Mrs Vaughan? I hope it's I'm sorry.
Can I say the honourable gentleman has raised a specific case, and I don't know all the details of the case that he has raised. If he is reflecting the fact that we are saying that those who are European Union citizens, in order to ensure that they have the verification of their position here in the European Union, should apply under the EU settlement scheme, then I believe it is the right approach that the government is taking. We are making that an easy scheme for people, and as he knows that I have said that from the national rollout of that scheme, then there will be no fee.
Clive Efford.
Speaker, the proposals from my right honourable friend on the front bench have the best prospect of securing a majority across this House, far better than her deal that lost, but that was voted against by 2/3 of honourable members. So isn't it incumbent on her to facilitate negotiations in cooperation with the front bench opposite and the European Union to see how much progress can be made amongst those proposals and then bring them back here to this House as they represent the best way forward?
Say to the honourable gentleman that, of course, as I've indicated in my statement, we're continuing our discussions with the official opposition. But it is also the case that this House made clear what it is that it wants to see in order to be prepared to agree a deal. That was made clear in the amendment that was put forward in the name of my honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West, and that was approved by this House.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
I'm sure that, like you, the Prime Minister is ferociously well read and will have read the 14th century masterpiece Divine Comedy, which is home to Dante's Inferno, the 9 circles of hell. The 8th circle was reserved for fraudsters. Isn't that where we'll find those from the referendum campaign who broke electoral law, deployed all kinds of political sorcery and false promise in order to win the referendum, and at this rate, I'm afraid to say, is probably where our own withdrawal agreement's going?
No.
Debbie Abrahams.
It is absolutely clear. It's absolutely clear that the EU will not reopen negotiations to discuss the draft withdrawal agreement on the backstop or any other of the issues. And it's profoundly disappointing that the Prime Minister is pretending otherwise. It's also clear, as the Right Honourable Member for Beaconsfield and others have said, that we're running out of time, that the economy is stalling and that businesses are really floundering. So, in the interest of the country, Prime Minister, will you agree to extend Article 50?
Minister. First of all, say to the honourable lady that we are in talks with the European Union, so the premise of her question is, I believe, not correct. They are talking to us about what changes could be possible in relation to the backstop. So that's the first point. And as my honourable member, honourable friend, the member for Wells, has pointed out, actually to complain about the impact on the economy of uncertainty and then to ask to increase the period of uncertainty is a contradiction.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, mention has been made of the different parts of the UK. I have the honour to represent the far north of Scotland. I suspect the House has gathered that by now. When I put it to the Prime Minister a few days ago that the European structural funds had brought great historic good to my part of the world, greatly benefited my constituents, it paid for new airports, roads, economic development, tourism, things like that. She referred me to the Shared Prosperity Fund. Mr. Speaker, we are very scant on the detail of the Shared Prosperity Fund. Could I respectfully ask the Prime Minister to ask her officials to meet with myself and other interested members of Parliament to discuss what this fund might be and how it might apply to needy areas like mine?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, we're in the process of consulting and we'll be consulting on the nature of the Shared Prosperity Fund and the criteria with which that fund will operate. So I will ask relevant officials to meet with the Minister to meet with the honourable gentleman in the way he's requested.
David Hanson.
Police chiefs have told us yesterday that no deal will mean no access to DNA, no access to security alerts on terrorism, no access to the European arrest warrant. The Prime Minister's own deal will not give security on those issues over the next 2 years pending discussions with the ECJ. So why is she undertaking this reckless action, and will she undertake a backstop on security?
Thank Gentlemen, the deal that we have negotiated on the issue of security is one that does provide. There are, as he knows, two areas where it doesn't specify the particular instruments that will be used in relation to access, for example, to criminal records, but it does specify that there will be that access enabled, and the discussions will be the form that that access takes. The deal we've agreed actually ensures we're able to continue the security cooperation with the European Union that has helped to keep us safe.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said just now that she thinks that her deal is the best for the UK. So why won't she put her deal, why won't she put her trust in the UK people back for ratification?
When you're elected.
So, to the Honourable Lady, I refer her to the answer I gave to that question earlier.
Mr. Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister mentioned the meetings that she had with political parties in Northern Ireland, but she gave no indication at all of having listened to anything they had to say. Sinn Féin and SDLP could not have been clearer that tinkering with the backstop is tantamount to tinkering with the permanence of the peace agreement and cannot be accepted. Meanwhile, the Ulster Unionists, in a statement issued on the 7th of February, have said, as time is short, an extension to Article 50 must not be ruled out if a workable deal is to be reached. Can the Prime Minister tell us, is she listening to the majority in Northern Ireland, or is she still obsessed with following the orders of the minority, as shown by the empty benches of the DUP?
When I was in Northern Ireland, I met the 5 political parties, I met representatives from civil society, I met businesses. They were making a variety of points in relation to the issue. One of the points that civil society was making particularly was the importance of the commitment to no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland in helping to ensure that the progress that had been made in Northern Ireland since the Belfast Good Friday Agreement would continue.
Murray.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister in her statement used the phrase hold your nerve with regards to negotiations with the EU. But is she also not saying to the sensible members of her cabinet, many of whom are sitting on the bench with her, that they should hold their nerve in refusing to take no deal off the table so she can run down the clock, come back to this House at the 11th hour and blackmail this House to back her deal?
Yep. Precisely what
I say to the honourable gentleman that the choice that this House will face, and this choice will come at whatever point, but I believe it should come before the 29th of March, so we can deliver on the 29th of, leaving the EU on the 29th of March. The choice that this House will face and members of this House will face is very simply whether they do want to leave with a deal or whether they want to leave with no deal. Because unless you stay in the European Union, the only way not to have no deal is to agree a deal.
Brendan O'Hara.
Since her dubbing in this House in January, the Prime Minister has sought to reopen the withdrawal deal. But in the last 2 weeks, the Austrian Chancellor, the German Chancellor, the Dutch Prime Minister, President of the European Council, the French President, the Irish Prime Minister and the President of the European Commission have all been absolutely unequivocal in saying they will not be reopening the deal. Yet the Prime Minister still acts as if it's all going swimmingly. So can she tell us, which one of that group does she expect to blink first?
Say to the honourable gentleman that there are also some of those that he has referred to who have referred to the need for us to find creative solutions in order to ensure that we can deal with the issue that's been raised by this Parliament.
Adrian Bailey.
Speaker, so far the Prime Minister's Brexit policy has involved transport arrangements with no ships, a facilitation arrangement in Northern Ireland with no facilitators, and a backstop arrangement that doesn't actually stop anything. On top of that, we've been promised meaningful votes that disappear like mirages as we get near them. When will the Prime Minister get real and recognise that only a customs union with the EU will sort the Northern Ireland border issue, protect our manufacturing and command a majority of this House?
I say to the honourable gentleman that it is not the case that the only resolution of the issue of the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland is the customs union with the European Union.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's own economic analysis, which was on the Chequers deal, not the Prime Minister's disastrous deal, demonstrated that our nation and the people of our country are going to be significantly poorer Why does the Prime Minister think that without a customs union, that people on these benches, Labour MPs, are going to vote for people to be poorer by following her deal?
Say to the honourable lady, first of all, I did make clear that the deal that the government had put forward was analysed in the economic analysis. We recognise that the political declaration that is part of the vote that took place in the House of Commons did not analyse the political declaration. There wasn't economic analysis of the political declaration because there are elements of that that are not yet tied down and agreed. However, variations were indicated within the economic analysis. A mid-term variation was in relation to friction at the border, was indicated. What can I say to the honourable lady? That it is not the case, that we will, leaving the European Union, the analysis shows that leaving the European Union and the deals that are proposed would leave us poorer than we are today. What it does show is differences in the growth in the economy under the various deals, but we're leaving the European Union, compared to staying in the European Union, but we're leaving the European Union. And the analysis showed that the deal that the government had proposed was the deal that was best for respecting the referendum and protecting jobs in the economy.
Geraint Davis.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is offering a choice between being shot in the head with a no-deal Brexit or shot in the foot with her Brexit. When will she realise that the best way of getting her deal through this House is with the proviso that it will be ratified by a public vote, when the public can judge between her deal and the existing deal staying in the EU, and if they opt for that, we'll save 2 years of the transition period and could get on with the jobs at hand.
I'm not quite sure what timescale the honourable gentleman thinks he would save by having a second referendum, because that in itself would take considerable time to take through this House and put in place. But I will respond to him in the way that I've responded to others. I do not believe it's right to have a second referendum. I believe it is right to deliver on the result of the 2016 referendum.
Sweeney.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister could achieve a majority in this House if she were just to recognise the scale of the defeat that she had on our deal recently and bring forward amendments to our red lines on a customs union with British Sea and trade deals. That would be the way to break the impasse. But she doesn't seem to be prepared to do that because it would break her own party in the process. So it's party before country. She's also presenting a false choice to Parliament by saying that it's a choice between a deal or crashing out with no deal. We know for a fact that the Prime Minister has the option, if it came down to the wire, the last 24 hours, that she could revoke Article 50 and stop the clock to save us from a disastrous no deal. If it came to it, would the Prime Minister do that?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, he suggests that I revoke Article 50. Revoking Article 50 means going back on the result of the 2016 referendum. It's no good. It's no good the honourable gentleman shaking his head. What the European Court of Justice made clear in its determination was that it was open to an individual member state to themselves request a revocation of revoke Article 50, but that meant actually staying in the European Union.
Of course, B for Brown comes before G for Grey, but on the other hand, A for Airdrie comes before K for Kilmarnock. Mr Neil Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister asked us to hold our nerve and essentially to trust her. But doesn't she have a nerve in asking us to support her plan when it's been her plan, her deal, her intransigence for 30 months that has got us into the mess? And how can we trust her when she continues to run down the clock by wasting our time this week and next by retabling a motion from last month, and she continues to gamble a no deal in front of us in order to put her party, her position ahead of the people?
What the government is doing is taking the instruction of this Parliament, which was to get changes to the withdrawal agreement, get changes to the backstop, so that this Parliament can agree a deal. That's what we're working on, and that's what we're determined to deliver.
Yes, indeed. Mr Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the trust me and hold our nerve theme, let's look at the no-deal preparations in terms of the ferry contract. Using the emergency procedure exemption for direct awards to the ferry companies in breach of European rules,
an award to a ferry company with no ships and negative assets. Yesterday at the dispatch box, the Transport Secretary said, "Don't worry, it hasn't cost taxpayers money." We now learn there's been up to £800,000 spent in external consultants. And at the dispatch box, the Transport Secretary ducked issues about legal challenges while the department was in court. Will she sack the Transport Secretary, or is that the general level of competence of this government that we're supposed to have trust in?
No, and can I point out to the honourable gentleman, he talks about monies that have been spent. Money was indeed spent on securing all of the contracts that were let. That was third-party due diligence was properly carried out, and it would have been carried out regardless of who the agreements were entered into with.
Well, I'm grateful to the Prime Minister and to all colleagues. I have been advised that the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Scottish National Party, has a point of order that relates to earlier exchanges. And if that be so, I'm happy to take it now. Point of order, Mr Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm most grateful, although I rise more in sorrow than I do in anger. You know, we live through exceptional times, and it's one thing to hear the Prime Minister refer to having wanted to have this decided in December when she actually took it off the table. If that wasn't bad enough, when I pressed her on the issue of the economic analysis of her deal, she said, and I quote, "The government has published economic assessments of the proposals that have been put forward." And furthermore, she went on to say that I had perhaps inadvertently misled the House. Mr Speaker, that beggars belief, because if anyone has inadvertently misled the House, it is indeed the Prime Minister, because the facts of the situation are the Treasury published an economic analysis of Brexit in November, before the Prime Minister's deal, that in no way refers to the Prime Minister's deal. This goes way beyond spinning, but perhaps more importantly is that this House is going to be asked to vote on a proposition that we haven't been given the economic impact assessment on. So I'm asking two things. Firstly, can the Prime Minister perhaps correct the record from what she said earlier? And secondly, what options are open to us to make sure that we go through perhaps the most important vote that this House has taken place on, that we do have the facts of the economic assessment? And finally, it is the case in any of the Brexit assessments that were made by the Treasury that will be worse off than the current deal. That's the fact and the reality of the situation. The Prime Minister really has to earn some grace.
I mean, the Prime Minister has been at the dispatch box for 2¼ hours and has answered all inquiries. She's welcome to return to the dispatch box if she wants in response to what's been said, but she's under no obligation to do so. Under no obligation to do so. Well, if she was, of course, the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I confirm what I said earlier was that the government put forward a deal and the economic analysis was done on that deal. The political declaration, which is part of what was brought to this House, the Right Honourable Gentleman says that there was no reference to that in the economic analysis. The economic analysis indicated the variation that might be necessary or might be the impact as a result of the various elements of the spectrum of choice on friction at the border. That reflected the fact that the political declaration had not confirmed the point at which friction would or would not occur. That was in the economic analysis that was published before this House took the vote on the meaningful vote.
Can I just... No. Can I very gently say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that I think for today, honour is served. I was very happy to hear the Right Honourable Gentleman's point of order, and the Prime Minister has graciously responded. I don't wish to invest the proceedings with levity, but insofar as the Right Honourable Gentleman asks what can be done to ensure that all the facts are in the possession of the House at the point at which key votes take place, I don't suppose that the Right Honourable Gentleman is investing me with such powers to assure that state of affairs. I cannot, not least because one person's fact is another person's opinion. That is in the nature of political argument. All I would say, and I think another example of it has been provided today by the exchanges on this statement, for which again I thank the Prime Minister and all colleagues. This House will always have the fullest possible opportunity, institutionally and in terms of individual members, to state views, to pose questions and to extract answers. That's the best we can do, and my role is simply to try to facilitate that. I'm glad I think we finished on a reasonably harmonious note, and let's perhaps leave it there for now. Just before we move to the second statement, the Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport has been in his place, patiently waiting the opportunity to make his statement. Perhaps I can just notify the House, as I have to notify the House in accordance with the Royal Assent Act 1967, that Her Majesty has signified her royal assent to the following acts. Finance Act 2019, Voyeurism Offences Act, Order Security Act 2019, Tenant Fees Act 2019, Crime Overseas Production Orders Act 2019. Order.